And unconventional economic theory is gaining some traction thanks to the policy teams of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders.
I think the first thing that we need to do is break the mistaken idea that taxes pay for 100% of government expenditure.
MMT has been getting a lot of attention lately, but most people criticizing it have no idea what the hell it is. MMT is not money printing or a brand new system or a political prescription of policies. It's a description of how the system as it is already works. And the main insight is that a government with its own fiat currency and floating exchange rates doesn't have to worry about defaulting on currency denominated in its own debt. This is a fact. Government debt isn't like household debt. All this scaremongering over the debt is purely emotional and a relic of the gold standard era. The government doesn't have a funding problem. Where do you think it gets the money in the first place? It spends the money into the economy first, and then it collects it back via taxes and borrowing. Now, of course, the controversy surrounds the extent to which deficit spending is inflationary, but inflation is caused by spending that exceeds production capacity. That's why you have countries like Japan with over twice the debt to GDP ratio as the US flirting with deflation, while you have countries like Turkey with a third of the debt to GDP ratio with double-digit inflation. Here's an analogy. Imagine you have a grocery store with 100 unsold oranges. If I buy 10 more oranges, that doesn't drive up the price of oranges, but if I try to buy 200 oranges, well then there's a shortage driving up the price. Another example is if you want to hire an engineer and all engineers are currently employed, well then you have to pay them more, driving up the wages, which is inflationary. Now, the Federal Reserve and economists use full employment as a proxy for an economy at productive capacity, and full employment is defined as being at 4.5%. Right now we're at 4%. We're not even close to at productive capacity. Unemployment rate doesn't factor in part-time workers, underemployed workers, your college graduate who couldn't get a job in their major so they're working at Starbucks, disparaged workers, people who outright leave the labor force like me. So to suggest we're at full production capacity is complete nonsense. If you want to see an economy at capacity, go back to World War II. Government surpluses are held up like some kind of holy grail, but the last 7 times we've run surpluses, the first 6 have directly preceded depressions, and the last one run by Clinton in the 90s preceded the recession of 2000. This is because a government surplus is a private sector deficit, meaning that money is drained from the private sector. This is contractionary. On the other hand, a government deficit is a private sector surplus, meaning money is injected into the private economy. When the private sector has a net desire to save, due to the paradox of thrift, this is contractionary. Government deficit spending injects money back into the economy to compensate for this, while also offering a sort of savings account for them to park their money. Treasury bonds are effectively almost identical to a savings account. Now, none of this is to say that we can just recklessly deficit spend. The point is that inflation is the constraint, and what you spend the money on matters. If there's a lot of excess capacity in the economy, a lot of unemployed people, unsold inventory, idle factories, then we can get away with a lot more deficit spending, whether that be on investment or consumption, and not necessarily cause inflation. Of course, there are other implications. If we print too much money, then the currency would depreciate. So if we're relying on imports, that could harm us in certain ways. But in and of itself, deficit spending isn't necessarily a bad thing, and we are nowhere close to being at full production capacity. Politicians spend so much time bickering over the debt and the deficit and how are we going to pay for it. These questions, they don't matter. They don't even follow them anyways. The Republican Party, who pretends to care more, deficits always balloon under the Republican Party, like under Reagan, recent Trump tax cuts. Democrats, of course, aren't really that much better. Anyways, next time somebody tries to scaremonger you over the debt, tell them that the real problem is the fact that we deny people the resources they need, all in the name of the debt. We leave all these resources unutilized, all these unemployed people, because of the debt. And the debt is literally just digits on a computer. It doesn't matter. We're not on a gold standard anymore. Your aversion to it is purely emotional. Get over it. If you're interested in learning more about MMT, I'm going to put some links in the description. There's a nice free primer. The 2 books by Warren Mosler are fantastic, really easy to read. That'll really change the way you think about things if you're not familiar with this stuff. Of course, any videos by these people or Stephanie Kelton. I think everybody should be knowledgeable about how this stuff works, but especially if you're going to critique MMT, at least take the time to actually understand what the hell it is that you're critiquing, which is not what most people have done, by the way, including the Harvard-educated economists and the CEO of BlackRock and everybody else. So take the time to really understand what this stuff is. Again, it's not a political position. It's literally a description of how the system as it is already works. Now, there are a lot of political implications that stem from it, like the fact that we can afford to do more deficit spending, a job guarantee, blah, 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 all that stuff. But that's not actually part of MMT. That's just what a lot of MMT advocates advocate for. But MMT itself is literally just a description of how the system works. I'm not an economist. I'm not an MMT academic researcher or anything like that. I literally just spent the the last week or so, really reading and diving deep into MMT. I came into it thinking that MMT was just printing money because that's how it's labeled in the media, but that's not what it is. So when I actually learned about it, I was just shocked to see how misinformed the public is and the people criticizing it, which is just absurd. I mean, people are going out publicly criticizing something they don't understand. Anyways, that's it for this video.
There's nothing to prevent the federal government from creating as much money as it wants and paying it to somebody. The question is, how do you set up a system which assures that the real assets are created, which those benefits are employed to purchase? So it's not a question of security. It's a question of the structure of a financial system which assures that the real resources are created for retirement as distinct from the cash. The cash itself is nice to have, but it's got to be in the context of the real resources being created at the time those benefits are paid, so that you can purchase real resources with the benefits, which of course are cash.